Hi, everyone. This is going to be the Education Policy Panel, and it will be starting now. I'm Heather Kays. I am Managing Editor of School Reform News, and I'm also a Research Fellow for the Heartland Institute. I am very proud to have this panel here with me today, which includes Nevada Senator Scott Hammond, who wrote the most inclusive ESA legislation in the country. It's extremely impressive and something that should be replicated in other states. It has to serve as model legislation. I also, right next to me is Chantal Lovell. She's Communications Director of the Nevada Policy Research Institute, and she's worked extensively on ESAs as well. And then we have Jami Lund, who is Senior Policy Analyst for the Freedom Foundation. And he's worked a lot with researching teachers' unions and the impact that they have on student achievement. So first, I want to start off with Chantal, and I'm curious as to why you feel like ESAs were a better option for Nevada than a voucher program or some other school choice option.
So there's a lot of reasons why I think ESAs are preferable not only in Nevada but elsewhere across the country. From a conservative perspective, the number one reason is that ESAs allow more freedom. With a voucher, as many of you probably know, you're limited in where the money can be spent. The money essentially goes from the government to the school of choice. With an education savings account, the parent really has all the freedom to dictate how that money is spent. And I think we're coming to a point in time when parents are really getting sick and tired of not having a say in their child's education. So the ESA, for the first time ever, gives them the ability to use the knowledge that they have about their child. I mean, they know their child better than anyone else, and certainly better than any government bureaucrat can know. And they can decide if their child needs tutoring, or if their child needs an online school or private school or what have you. So that's the predominant reason. In states like Nevada, and there's plenty of states that have a Blaine Amendment where there's concerns over government money going directly to a religious organization like a Christian school or Catholic school. So the ESA avoids that by giving the money to the parent instead. So it's similar to a public employee receiving their paycheck and then tithing a portion of that. There shouldn't be the religious objection. I mean, you will get those objections. And finally, from a communications perspective, vouchers, unfortunately, are a very tainted word these days. The left has been very good at taking a voucher and turning it into something that has a very negative connotation. And education savings accounts don't have that, and hopefully we can keep that a pure phrase. So I think just from a marketing perspective, it's also very exciting. It's very new, and you know, the senator and I were talking about this last night. The education savings accounts are kind of like the smartphone of vouchers. They're just the new and improved version of them. So,
thank you. Senator Hammond, you wrote this ESA legislation, which many people thought would never pass. And I guess my first question would be, how the heck did you pull this off?
You know, that was a conversation I had with myself as I was leaving Carson City. The session was over. I had a long drive back to Carson City in my car alone. And about halfway back to Las Vegas, it dawned on me what I had actually done. And if you guys are like me and you're all by yourself and nobody's around and the music is going, and you'll start jumping around in your car and you don't care who looks or watches in on you. And I just realized I'd passed something that was a game changer, a very significant bill that gave power back to the parents. We're living in an age where not only putting power back in the hands of the parents is good, but they can actually do something with it. You know, innovation has changed the landscape of education. There's a lot of innovation, there's a lot of technology, there's a lot of options for parents and students. And what we don't see are things that are coming down the road. There are so many options coming. What I love about the ESAs, and Chantal actually kind of highlighted this, they just, they're very flexible. They give the parents a lot of freedom. I always think, when people come up now, and we're having a bit of a debate in Nevada, the 100-day rule that was part of the piece of legislation that we enacted basically says that if you've been in a private school and you would like to have access to the ESA, you have to go back into the public school for 100 days. So that now we can account for you. Now you're back on the budget cycle, and then you take the kid out, and then you can put them anywhere. A lot of private schools are coming to me saying, a lot of our kids are leaving. We're not sure if we can survive this. What are you going to do to help out? I sympathize. We do have some really great private schools in the Las Vegas Valley and as well as in northern Nevada. I just think that they have to be creative and find a way to get over this. I've been somewhat chastised by the left and others who, when I said this is a hiccup, this is a very minimal hiccup. It's a transition that occurs when you put in sweeping policy like we did. But my answer is that I didn't do this necessarily to transfer public money to private schools. I mean, I love the private schools. I wish them well. They're creative. They're entrepreneurial. They have to find a solution to get over that. But my purpose was to put the money and the control back in the hands of the parents. Somewhere out there, somebody has got a great idea for education and education delivery. Someone's got a great, new, innovative idea that will probably not only get the kid what they need, but also will do it at a cost savings. All we needed to do is provide a platform for them. And that's what this does. It provides a platform for a lot of innovative ideas out there that nobody even thought about a year ago. And you're going to see a lot of changes in Nevada. It's an exciting time. It's a very exciting time to see all of a sudden possibilities come to the forefront that weren't even imaginable a year ago or 5 months ago. And yes, when I tell parents, I feel bad that your private school is going through this sort of change. Private schools are very innovative. They'll get over it. They'll figure out a way to survive. But then they'll be in the game. They'll be in the game as much as the public school education sector. What I mean by that is public schools are going to have to up their game in order to retain students. If they want to keep that school viable and keep it moving forward, they're going to have to deliver a system of education or education that is better than anywhere else so that the parents will want to stay. Private schools too. Private schools will have to do the same thing. Anybody who delivers education will have to do it, and they'll have to do it better than others. And I'm not saying that they'll have to do, public schools will offer an education system that a certain segment of the population will cling to. We all know kids are not the same. They're not cookie cutter. They all learn differently. And so there will be kids who still thrive in sort of the public sector way of teaching, the public schools. But then some private schools will innovate a little bit, and they'll offer a different way of delivering that education. And those kids who like that, that's where they'll go to. So that's why I think the ESAs are great, and that's why I was very supportive of it. And I don't know if that answers the original question of how I got them through. Maybe I should spend some time on that later. But it was one of those where I don't think anybody really saw me coming. And so when you're ninja. And you have those skills, and all of a sudden, people are going, "What just happened?" Then you're quiet, you're stealthy, and that's what we had to be a little bit. And it wasn't necessarily by design; it was just one of those things where we just, when we introduced it, we went to the state senate. We had a committee hearing, and that was probably a month into the session, maybe a little less than a month into the session. It was passed by our committee. I'm the vice chair of the Senate Committee on Education. We had to do some modification to the bill, but after the modification, it passed the Senate Committee. Some of those who were in opposition to the bill, they voiced their concerns, but they weren't too worried because they just didn't see it actually getting through. So they didn't get too keyed in on it. They didn't get a lot of their constituency writing or texting or mailing or phoning in any kind of opposition. It sat there for a long time. A couple of weeks went by, and we had a very important bill come to the floor. After that bill after it passed, I think it was a tax bill that came to the floor. Right after that, my bill was sent from the Committee on Education to the Committee on Finance. And once it went to Finance, a lot of people just speculated that's where it's going to die. But I didn't think it was going to die, so I kept working behind the scenes, found a way to satisfy the concerns of some of my colleagues, even on my side of the table. They were concerned, and rightfully so, about the budget. This had a huge impact. One of the things that we did right away is, at first, when the bill was written, we actually and it was unintentional. The people who wrote the bill did not understand what I wanted. There was no way to include those who were already in private schools. I alluded to the 100-day rule. If we would have included those, we would have put a hole in the budget by over $200 million, and there's just no way to get around that. I just had too many colleagues, both on the left and the right, who said that they just couldn't support putting that big of a hole, so we had to take them out of, and that's what I told the LCB, our Legislative Counsel Bureau. I said, you got to take them out of the bill and put that 100-day requirement in there. Once we did that, there was very little financial problems with the bill, and I had more support for the bill because of that. As soon as we figured out that component and a few other little ones, it got out of the Senate Finance Committee, went to the floor the next day. Off the Senate, we voted it out of the floor of the Senate the next day. It went to the Assembly Education Committee the next day. They had a hearing on it. They waived the rules, passed it out of the House Assembly, and then that night, because we were getting close to the end of the session, we had a lot of emergency floor sessions. They actually heard the bill, or they introduced the bill again for the second time on the Assembly floor, voted on it, passed it out, and then the next day they had the final vote on the bill. So in about a 3-day, maybe 4-day period, and I can't remember the exact timing, but I think it was within 3 days, it went from the Senate Finance Committee off the floor of the Assembly, and then a few days later to the desk of the governor, where he had already committed to sign the bill. And that's how it happened. Stealthy. No one had time to form any kind of opposition to it. Again, I'm not that clever. It just happened to be that's the way it went. We were trying to get it through, and even though we had to wait till the end to do it, it was just because that was just the way the timing worked. But the result was we didn't have a lot of opposition. There wasn't a lot of phone calls. There wasn't time for the unions to gather anybody to say this is a horrible bill. It just passed through. I wish I had a better story.
So what were the compromises that you had to make in order to get this legislation through?
One of the biggest compromises, several little ones. One, I sat down with the chair, I'm the vice chair, as I mentioned, of the Education Committee in the Senate. One of the things we did at the very beginning, I sat down with the chair and we said, there's one problem. Most of the time when you have school choice options, we pass them, but then we don't find a way to get the students to their school of choice or to whatever delivery system that they want. And so one of the first things we did is we built in a mechanism for the parents to actually have access to a portion of the money for transportation. So if you look at the bill itself, it says that a parent can spend up to $750 of the ESA on a yearly basis for transportation. We're not going to stop there. We're going to go and talk to our regional transportation system, the RTC of Southern Nevada and also Northern Nevada, and we're going to try and find ways to route buses or other mass transit systems to schools that tend to have more and more of the ESA applicants going to them. I mean, that's another thing that we're going to do down the road, but we provided that $750 so that parents could actually use it for gas, rent a vehicle if need be, or just get their student to the school of choice. That was one. Two, there was a provision in the bill that would have allowed them to roll the money over. As you know, the ESA, what I love about the ESA is it's flexible. So what happens is you have right now, they can, most people will ask for an education savings account and get 90% of the distributive school account, which is roughly about $5,100 this year. So now a parent has $5,100 in their account in the financial institution, and if they don't spend all that money, they're able to roll it over to the next year. So for some schools, and I talked to a few of them, there's one school in particular that their tuition is about $3,900 a year, a little less if you have more than one sibling going to the school. So with that $3,900, presumably you'll have about $1,100, maybe $1,200 left over. Well, then that goes into stays in the account, rolls over so that the next year you have the $5,100 plus that $1,200. That is a great provision because that allows you to use it in middle school where the cost goes up a little bit, high school where normally the cost goes up even more than that, so that you have that money accessible to you. Originally I had written in there, and similar to Arizona and Florida, so that they could roll it over to higher education. That came into, it was problematic for our Senate Finance chair who thought that perhaps people would start using that as a college savings account. So we took that provision out for now. We'll go look at it probably later on down the road. I think that with that provision in there, it's actually one of those things that allow people to be good stewards of the money. I'm afraid that we're going to get to the point where you roll over, and by the time you're a senior in high school, you're going to have a few $1,000s left in your account, and you're thinking to yourself, how do I spend it? That use it or lose it mentality, and that's not what I wanted. I wanted people to think about it as an investment, also as a way to be good stewards of the money. If I don't need to use it, I don't use it. Then the first year of college, if you stay in Nevada and you're at a Nevada institution of higher learning, to be able to use that towards tuition there, I think that would have been well, it was preferable for me, but we'll see if we can get that back in there.
So this question is for all three panelists. There are absolutely lawsuits on the way against the Nevada ESA program. How should people be gearing up to handle that, and what arguments do you expect to hear?
I'll let you guys grab.
Well, so I'll just start on this. I won't answer the whole thing, but I'll take a crack at it. So in anticipation that something will be filed soon, at the Nevada Policy Research Institute, which is a free market think tank in Nevada, we are working with some other free market groups in the state to find potential defendants. It's what it boils down to in a lot of cases, unfortunately, even in legal challenges, is a PR campaign. And so in anticipation of this, we're looking for families that want to take advantage of the ESA, that plan to use it, that will be really sympathetic in the public eye, because the reality is school choice is for the minorities, is for the poor, is for the children that have been hurt by our public school system, that have been stuck. And so it's that line of thinking, in looking for the people that are going to be helped by this. So, and we're also trying to work very quickly and get people enrolled in the ESA program. We were fortunate, the Nevada Treasurer is the one administering the program, and his office has been very helpful, I think, in trying to implement this quickly, and opened up applications last week. And in a week's time, there's already 650 people that have applied, or 650 families that have filled out applications. So, we're trying to build up a lot of public support so that when this comes under fire, there's a lot of people standing there ready to defend it. You all know when you give someone something, it's a lot harder to take it away. And that goes on both sides. So I think it's really important that when you face a challenge to a school choice bill, which it happens with all types of school choice bills, that you have people there that are ready to defend it and say how the law is positively impacting their students.
You're mocking me, right? I'm from Washington State, where we have exactly one charter school, the radical edge of innovation out here in Washington. So we don't spend a lot of time thinking about how to defend litigation against ESAs. We spend time figuring out how to actually get school choice as an opportunity for the families of our state as well. And so, ironically, both ends of that spectrum deal with the same issue, which is the champion of the status quo, the champion of the monopoly, the champion of high cost, low accountability, light workloads, which is the public sector labor organizations. And so in Washington State, our focus, I'm with an organization, the Freedom Foundation, has been on that part of the problem, because at the litigation end, the lawyers are paid for as a result of collective bargaining, workplace representation dues. In the marketing discussion, which you will absolutely have on these issues, the marketing of the evils of this crazy radical idea of charter schools, $650,000 came from union dues required as a condition of teaching a child how to read. About $1,000 a year now teachers in Washington are paying for the privilege of teaching a child how to read. So to address this, the fact that this is the opponent that you have to the idea of expanding options for families, of offering freedom, of cracking the monopoly and those that it serves, which is primarily adults. We do monopolies because they're convenient for adults, not because they're ideal for children or families. We have a number of pieces of litigation which really address the work, or litigate, well, we have litigation too, but we have a number of pieces of legislation which address the issue of the extraordinary privileges that states like ours give to this private sector service monopoly. And it really is a business venture providing workplace representation services with a ridiculously propped up state-afforded franchise with no consumer protections for the folks who are involved as far as accountability for the use of money, how much may be charged, what it can be spent on. All of that stuff is absent. If this were any other industry, there would be antitrust lawsuits in a heartbeat because it really operates in this extraordinary way. And if you want to ultimately get to the ability to have options for the families of your communities, then this is something that we really recommend as square one, both at the front end of even trying to get the legislation, but at the back end of trying to defend legislation which is successful, because the ability to force someone who wants to teach a child how to read to fund litigation against a law which allows parents to actually find options that match their children's needs is a dynamic that just needs to be broken. I've got papers on work that we've done, legislation that we're working on at the back of the room and on the front 2 tables here. So that's where I go as somebody from Washington where we don't have anything like this.
And I'm just going to add a little bit to what the two here have said, and I'm not going to try and brag or anything like that, because I'm not very good at bragging, but I started a charter school 4 years ago, and now we have 5 campuses. Sorry. And charter schools of choice are taking off in the state of Nevada. And I know that there are those. I heard from one last week who said that the charters that we have in Nevada aren't very good. I hate it when they label all charters. There's going to be good charters, there's going to be bad charters, just like there are public schools that are great and there are public schools that are horrible and terrible. So when they come at us and say charter schools are across the board not doing or performing as well as their sisters or brothers on the other side of the public sector, I take exception to that, because the really, really bad public school that happens to be in a section of town where people just aren't mobile enough to get away from it, they don't have the options that other people have to just pick up and move to a house in a good location with a good school. I'd rather have a mediocre charter school there servicing those people and get better, have the flexibility to get better, than I would to have a poorly publicly run school where they chronically pump out bad children, or they don't graduate them, where they don't give them the things that they need. Most of the time, though, those mediocre schools get better because more attention is lavished upon them. Having said that, going into this, I knew that we're going to have opposition right away. We didn't have a lot of opposition during the session because we kept it low key. Whenever I ran into problems with the bill, I didn't go running to anybody screaming that there was no stories out there that Senator Hammond was mad at the governor because this didn't get done, or mad at his colleague because they weren't pushing it fast enough. That's not the way I operate. And so it just kind of flew under the radar. That doesn't mean that there wasn't going to be some opposition. I think that in my life, the opposition usually comes after things happen. When I get something accomplished, that's when the opposition happens. So what Chantal was saying is absolutely true. A week ago, the Treasurer's Office, who's been tasked with starting this program, giving the regulations and implementing it, they've had 658 applicants so far. That was yesterday. That was noon yesterday. It's probably even more right now. That's significant because you want to have that many people. If we're looking for potential litigants later on, people who will defend the system, it's easier when you have thousands of people who want to be part of the program. Number 2, we've been trying to highlight legislators in the areas that will be mostly affected. Legislators who were on the other side of the aisle, who this was a very partisan issue during the legislative session. Not a single Democrat voted for this. I know that there are some Democrats who believe in school choice and who probably will like this because it'll be good for their constituents. It's just that you have to show them it's going to be good for their constituents. You have to hit them where it's most needed, and that is in those areas where the opponents will say, you pass this only for those who are upper middle class or wealthy. That's why you pass the ESA. Those are the ones who are going to benefit. So what do you have to do? You have to target those areas where there's chronic poverty, intergenerational poverty. It's cyclical. It just doesn't go away. You have to target those areas. You have to go in there and you have to show them that is where it is going to do the most good. And so one of the things we did, this was about, was it a month ago? We had sort of a big event at one of the schools that are in East Las Vegas. probably one of the most impoverished areas of Las Vegas. And it was a school that had been there for, I think, about 30 years. And they invited, it's a school that has been very upbeat. It's a private school. They're very upbeat. They're very excited about this bill. They understand that there's going to be some problems at the very beginning. They understand that, want to get over that hiccup and move on. And so they invited a lot. They had a lot of media. They had a lot of outreach to people in the community. So they had, I think, around 400 to 500 families show up to this event. A lot of them that they don't have students who go to the school. So this would be new students to the school. They were so excited about it, and we're talking. We had to translate the event in Spanish. So we are getting people who are going to be accessing this ESA account from the very beginning, who are minority, who are impoverished minority, who are looking for a way to get out of the schools that their kids are in. Because I always take exception when I hear, and this has been spoken at least twice now, parents don't know how to make these choices. It happened in a hearing, and it happened during one of our workshops when the treasurer was asking for ideas. Somebody got up and said, the reality is, research shows parents just don't know how to make this kind of a decision for their kids. You can imagine how well that went over. Didn't go over very well in the hearing because I took exception to that, and it didn't go over very well in the workshop where we had hundreds of people there. What was it, Chantal? I think we had a workshop and we had...
They had to keep going into overflow rooms. It was fantastic.
Yes, the workshop, I think it was conducted in Carson City, and then we had a room in Las Vegas where we broadcast down from Carson City. The biggest room that we had in our Grant Sawyer building was full to capacity. They had an overflow room. That overflow room was full, so they had to have a second overflow room. And so somebody went up there and said, parents just don't know how to make these kind of choices. That didn't go over very well. Basically the testimony there is that you had 400 or 500 parents who showed up at that event at a Mountain View Christian School for the potential of getting an ESA account. These people are excited. Every single one of them is excited. They want to start. So fighting a lawsuit really helps when you have so many people covering a broad array of groups, minority groups, socioeconomic groups, that they're all together saying we want this. And it'd be really difficult for my colleagues, both on the right and the left, to say get rid of a program when so many people want it. And so that right there is really, we're basically taking their arguments away from them, that this isn't going to help those in minority communities. It's not going to help those who are in lower socioeconomic communities. That's who we're targeting right now. Many people have come to me and said, I want to start a school, and this is where I want to start a school. I want to start a school in those areas right there. That's going to help take away the arguments from the other side and hopefully help us in litigation. A couple other things that we did, we wanted to make sure, when we were talking about litigation, some of the arguments we've heard is that this is going to take money away from the public education, and therefore we're taking money away from public, putting it in private, and oh no, private schools that have a religious bend to them. That's horrible. We can't do that. And I think you already touched on that. We've looked at this, and the argument is that we do the same thing with Medicaid. We give money to people, and then the people who receive the money, what do? They're the ones who choose what hospitals to go to, and some of them actually choose a faith-based hospital. That's been okay for a very long time. And the same thing is here. We're giving money to the parents. The parents are then turning around and changing and going somewhere where they'd like to go. And so that argument is taken away. We put all kinds of provisions in the bill to, I think the argument comes up from time to time, what about fraud? You're taking money away from public education. And the reality is we're taking 90% away from the distributed school account, which is not all the money. I feel like I'm taking up all the time here. Our schools get a lot of money from different areas. They get it from the state, they get it from the federal, get it from local taxes. We didn't touch the federal, we didn't touch the local taxes. We just took what the state proportions per pupil. And then they're only getting 90%. Most of them are only getting 90% unless you hit two triggers. If you are 185% of the poverty level or you have a learning disability, you can access 100% of the DSA. And that was my response to, hey, what about the kids who are most deserving, who really have most deserving meaning that they just don't have the means to do this. What about those? My opponents on the left kept saying, what about those kids who really need it? This is not going to help them. So my answer was, okay, instead of doing 90%, we'll go 100%. They didn't come back with anything after that. They stopped saying, hey, what about the most deserving? Because I don't know if I could dip into the local funds or not, but I think they were afraid of me doing that. So then we went to the 100%. But most of them are only going to be taking 90% out, which leaves 10% to the districts. So we're actually taking a student away from your school. And right now, one of the biggest problems we have is overcrowding in Las Vegas. We have an overcrowding problem there. So we're taking students out of the public school system, taking care of one of those problems, and then still leaving them 10% of the funding to take care of the other students.
Yeah, I want to just expand on that last point a little bit. I think it's really important that if you're crafting ESA legislation to leave a portion for the public schools. And it's not just the 10%, it's the local and federal too. Right. So the number one argument we see against ESAs or any form of choice is that it's taking money from the public schools. But in Nevada's case, because you're not touching the local, the federal, and you have that 10% from the state left, as a student takes an ESA, it actually increases per pupil spending in the state. It's an uphill battle getting people to hear that argument because, your opponents are so adamant that it takes money from the public schools, but everybody's screaming about per pupil spending not being enough, and this answers that call. And it also, parents can spend their money very efficiently. The private school systems, charter schools, spend money much more efficiently than the public schools. So it's not even necessary to allocate all the funds, and it really helps you in the debate department.
So I just have one last question, and then we'll open it up to the group. And I want to know from Jami, what do you think the most effective way to deal with these teachers' unions are when they have all of this power now and make these ridiculous demands all the time?
There's a couple of things. Certainly there are a lot of privileges that are granted in state law that are indefensible. The lack of consumer protections for folks who are trapped in this business arrangement with this organization that provides their workplace representation. Do they have to report like a private sector union does? Do they have obligations to let people vote on decisions that are made, or is that merely a courtesy which is extended when convenient? Do they have to negotiate with the public sector partner in secret or in public? And in many cases where school boards are elected with the help of union finances, is there maybe an element of conflict of interest where somebody who is funding both sides of the bargaining table is making decisions about service levels, accountability, tax obligations, and those sorts of things? So you're on the side of the angels, actually, on many of those issues, and you are on offense rather than defense. You're not trying to take anything away or damage, a legacy of helping the working man and bringing you the weekend. You're addressing legitimate, unfair advantages that are provided to a private entity. And so learning how to think and talk about this in this way is really important because it is a PR battle. And so at the end of the day, that's very important to be able to address that. The ideas that I've got are in the papers that are there. Some of the bills that we've been working on are in this vein. They're not really about services to children necessarily, other than maybe open meetings, posting the collective bargaining agreements online. We had opposition to just collecting and displaying the collective bargaining agreements, which sets your teacher evaluation, which sets your hours of service, which sets your accountability for what do you do with a teacher who's messed up. All of these very important. Yep. Federal government is addressing issues like how you evaluate a teacher. Our state lost its waiver from the No Child Left Behind Act because our teachers union would not let us use student learning as a factor in evaluating teachers. Well, those decisions are already being made at the local collective bargaining table and could be made differently. And so anything you can do to draw attention to the fact that the failures that the federal government and the states are dealing with, teacher evaluation. If every parent had 5 options for education, you would not need the state trying to figure out, or the federal government trying to figure out how to evaluate teachers. It would take care of itself. Because there are smart people who are operating these schools who will do what's necessary to serve children's interests, if that's the point. But in a monopoly, that's not the point. In a monopoly, the point is how do you access more resources to continue operating your enterprise? So getting involved in that kind of legislation, learning how to talk about it and addressing them on behalf of the workers, on behalf of the taxpayers, on behalf of the families that are served, and you really are on the side of the angels and you're not attacking and taking away. That's how it'll be described, but it starts to look a little silly to say, let's have a library of collective bargaining agreements, and they're saying it's a right-wing extremist attack on the working man and the weekend. You're like, you sound like crazy people, which is exactly what they do. So I really recommend doing that. We would love to help anybody who wants to work on those sorts of issues to be able to start tackling the undue power which is impacting these things, and we'd love these decisions made locally, not correcting the errors of a local monopoly with higher levels of bureaucracy.
Thank you. Does anybody have any questions?
Thank you. Nathan Dahm, Oklahoma. We actually had an ESA bill this session, that blew up, and to the author's credit, he tried to do everything he could to salvage it. He had to take out some exemptions for rural districts. In Oklahoma, we have over 500 school districts. It's ridiculous, but because of that, all the superintendents and all the administrators were up in arms, thinking that somehow they couldn't do the math. Even though ours was 80%, not 90%, they'd still keep 20%. They said they were going to have a loss of funding. Somehow they couldn't figure that out. But he had to cut out some of the rural districts. Then we had a problem with homeschool, and I was homeschooled. I'm a huge proponent of homeschool. Ours included options for homeschool families to be able to use this, but the homeschoolers were of the opinion that they didn't want it, even though it was optional. They didn't want it at all because they saw it being just kind of the camel's nose under the tent, that once it started happening, then there'd be more regulations come into it. Then we had an issue with the accountability, even though there was all kinds of provisions. Our treasurer was also going to be the one that was going to be have the oversight on it and do audits, and there was all kinds of opportunities for, if there was fraud, the punishments for that and everything. But it was just hurdle after hurdle after hurdle, and the author kept trying to overcome it, but it just became so toxic that he had to let it go this year because we had other things that we were going with. But I'm just curious, obviously it sounds like yours just kind of snuck through a little bit. You kind of worked behind the scenes, but did you have any of those similar issues, any of those similar arguments with individual members, or any way, or any suggestions on how to maybe overcome some of those difficulties that we had in Oklahoma?
Well, yes, thank you very much, as Nathan, right? I'll say that the homeschool network that we have in Nevada, it's very similar to your story and some others that I've spoken with. They're very vocal. They have a pretty good group. Now, that doesn't mean that they represent all homeschoolers. However, what they said, we sat down and we came to an agreement. Agreement changed a little bit. They were upset with me, and I said, well, we're working on the fly, don't worry, and it kind of just, we said, we're willing to make sure that this gets by with your blessing, because we want to make sure you're okay, because I don't want to hurt the homeschool network there. They want to make sure that they have no strings attached to the government, whether it be federal or state. And so we basically crafted it so that it said, if you're in the state of Nevada, if you're a homeschooler, you have to declare to the state, well, I'm going to homeschool. So you still do that. If you declare to the state that you're homeschooling your child, you do not have access to an ESA. However, if you don't declare, but you want to use the funds for programs that are then approved by the treasurer is going to be, he's going to have an approval process to get on a list of approved providers, if you will. People who are delivering educational system, whether it be a private school, a tutor, an accredited tutor, or some sort of program or curriculum that's provided online. They're going to have a list of that. So, if my sister wants to teach their kid at home but wants to use a curriculum that is all based online, she can still do that as long as she doesn't declare herself a homeschool family or homeschool mother. And so we bifurcated that so that those who are adamant about not having any ties to the government will be able to continue along that path. They don't have to worry about that the strings are tied to them. And of course, they're really active, and they tell all the homeschool parents, if you want to make sure that we are outside the box still and that we don't have any ties, do not take any of the money. But if you want to take some of the money, you still have to put your kid back into public school for 100 days. And then after that, you can take them out and then homeschool them and using whatever approved curriculum there is. That's the one thing. And then the loss of funding. We only have 17 counties, and of course they weren't too happy about it. But most of the legislators understood they're not going to have a loss of funding. They're still going to have, as she explained, as Chantal explained, 10% plus the local, plus the federal money that's coming into the schools. They'll be okay. And that's, I don't know if that addressed all of them, but did I miss one? I think she's going to try and pick it up.
I'll just add one other thing. I mean, hopefully what's happened in Nevada will open a lot of doors and make it easier to pass ESAs, especially universal ESAs in other states. But it is early. I think it's too soon to tell how that will affect things in other states. I mean, I'm sure you are aware that the states that do have ESAs, aside from Nevada, have come at it very slowly, just making them available to small groups like minority groups and disadvantaged populations. And I think that's a very smart way if you've had as much trouble as Oklahoma has had, because at the end of the day, the people that we do want to help are those populations, are those targeted populations. Yes, you would prefer to have it available to everyone, but it may just be the path that you have to take, like Arizona is taking. And I mean, you're still seeing a lot of successes, but going at it by more sympathetic populations that are really harder. I would think it's hard for a lawmaker to say, no, I don't want to give a child living in poverty this extra option. So that may just be something that has to happen in Oklahoma, unfortunately.
Hi, Isaac Latterell, representative, South Dakota. In our state, we have about a 50-50 split between state funds and local funds when it comes to education. And then, of course, the federal funds are on top of that. So in that situation, are you saying that if we went 90% of state funds, that child would still be enrolled in that district or counted in that district, and they'd be receiving almost 60% of the funds that they were currently receiving? Does that sound like the right math that I'm using here, if they're keeping all the local and 10% of the state?
It sounds about right, because you're saying it's a 50-50 split, 50 local, and then they're getting 50% from the state. And so the disclaimer here is I'm no mathematician, so it looks like Jami can actually answer that better than me. And I claim that in everything, by the way. My wife knew that going into the marriage. I'm no mathematician. I don't do the math in the home. I don't do that kind of stuff, so I'll turn it over.
Well, I'm no mathematician either, but I do know there is some element of federal funding which is on a FTE basis. So there is some backing out of federal funds. If you don't have any students, the federal government doesn't still send you money. So there is some reduction there. The question is the 10% of the, and the local is I guess the most interesting guaranteed piece, because that's usually a tax assessment against the community of a finite amount, regardless of how many students you have. So that part stays intact. The federal, there may be some federal money that's just based upon your overall, but ultimately, if you have no students, you don't get federal funds.
Fred Birnbaum, Idaho Freedom Foundation. I have a question about the 100-day rule. I can see that being very unpopular, and just want to know if there's a workaround. In other words, pulling the student out of the private school. I'm not sure how exactly 100, it sort of sounds like roughly half a school year. I think there's probably some clean number there, but is there a workaround? Because I think that would, at least potentially in Idaho, really frighten folks off, because it, just as you had alluded to, it's the mechanism taking your kid out in 100 days. It sounds very disruptive. And is there a way you can step around that or do something that would be more palatable?
Well, the Treasurer's Office proposed some regulations the other day, and I'm not sure if I'm completely in agreement with it. We had to put the 100 days in there because you don't want to put a hole in your budget. I mean, that's the reality. Is when we're legislators, you don't want. We're in Nevada. We're only there once every 2 years. It's biennial, and it never is a good idea to have to be called back into session, a special session. Because you didn't get it right, because you didn't anticipate certain things, you didn't anticipate the right enough of revenue, or you didn't understand how much you were going to be spending. And so that was one of the big concerns for the chair of finance when he was looking at this. How do we make sure that we don't have this big, huge hole? Because he knew, and we all knew, those of us who understood what education choice is, we all knew that a lot of people were going to take advantage of this. And by advantage, I mean they were going to take and look at this program because they want this for their student, because most people want a better education for their students. So we knew it was going to be very, very popular. 650 students in 1 week, maybe we didn't anticipate that. But the long story is, or the short story is that we just had to watch out for that money. We couldn't just allow them to go in there. And so right now, the treasurer has come up with a regulation. I think you saw this. They're trying to provide a way for private school students to go into the public arena, take one class, keep them in private school, take one class on the public sector, and then qualify for that 100 days. And I think that 100 days is almost like 2/3 of the school year, to be honest with you. It comes pretty late in the spring. And it is a disruptor, but the reason why we put it in there is because we figure most people who can afford to be in private school will maintain their student in private school, because there's no way they would want to disrupt their education, put them back into public school, that they would keep it there. It was a way for us to slowly transition. In anticipation of that, I've always talked about how I believe that if you're a kindergarten student coming into public or coming into education, that you should be eligible for the ESA right away. That there should be no requirement for a kindergartner to go to public school for 100 days, get out, and then go to private school or any other kind of delivery system of education that you want. I always felt that coming into kindergarten, the regulation should be you can have access to an ESA right away. What that does then is it actually it basically allows for that transition to happen, so that within 12 years or less, instead of having 94% of your student population eligible for an ESA, it'll be 100% in less than 12 years or less, depending on other things that we might do legislatively in the future to start rolling in people who are already in private schools, even if it's a slower roll up. Maybe transitioning people from 5, who have nothing, who can't access the ESA, to maybe 5% of the ESA, and then rolling it up. Even if we don't do any of that, it's still over 12 years. We'll have 100% of the population enrolled in or eligible for an ESA. And so that was my concern, is that putting that hole in the budget.
And the second concern, in addition to the hole in the budget, because it's an immediate hole that you get if you're doing that, is the story that you're telling. I mean, you're saying we should pass this bill because there are children who are not able to access a quality education, and without this legislation, you can't get them there. And then it turns out to be legislation which is simply backfilling the tuition of people who are already in private schools. So now your bill is described as helping rich kids, subsidizing rich kids, and that's not the story that you're telling with this.
Yes. Yeah, and I can't highlight that. I should have started with that, but that is true. What is the buzzword everybody likes to use nowadays? Optics. The optics of it is that we're trying to find those students who don't have educational opportunities because they don't have access to it, like somebody else who can just move from one school district to another to find a better school. We're trying to find the student who just can't, and we're trying to help them out. But like I said, over the course of 12 years, I've always been a staunch believer that everybody should have access to school choice. We're just trying to help those who are the most needy right now.
Jan Angel, Washington State Senate. Jami put it very lightly on what we go through here with our unions, and in fact, if they knew we were having this conversation, they would be protesting out front. I mean, it's that bad. It has been extremely toxic. The union has actually approached our teachers, telling them that they will contact parents of the students in their classrooms. And I just wondered, with Nevada making the progress that you have, all of that always helps us. But how did you work with your unions to get this through?
How did I work with them to get it through?
Does anyone work with them?
I didn't work with them. They came up afterwards and said, during the process, and said, we don't really love it, but what can we do to make it more palpable? And so we did. We talked with them a little bit. I don't know if you guys know this, but I'm actually a public school teacher. I have been for 16 years. I just stepped down from my position to take I stepped down as a board member of a charter school, stepped away from the public school sector, took a job as an assistant principal with a charter school. But I was in that world for 16 years. In Nevada, we have different laws, and we're not, obligated to be members of the union. I was not. So I was not a member of the union for 16 years, although I was a public school teacher. But I'm also a big, firm believer in competition. And I believe that's why I'm a big, firm believer in school choice, because it provides that competition that's necessary. Having said that, I'll tell you this, a very interesting story that happened after we passed it. One of those members who was a delegation for the teachers union in the state of Nevada came up afterwards and said, now that you've passed the bill, would you have any thoughts as to, or would you be amenable to, what we did is we created entities, like a parent can be an entity, meaning that they can receive an ESA so that they can then choose curriculum for their student, an approved curriculum, that kind of thing. And so he said, hey, would you mind if next time you could use, put teachers as an entity? And what that does is it basically allows a teacher to then contract with parents. So now a teacher can go up and say, yes, I can teach your family. They can choose 6 families, 3 or 4 kids apiece. They have about 20, you can get 20, 22 students, which is probably less than the amount of students in a classroom, in any given classroom in Clark County, which is Las Vegas. Right now, you're having class sizes of anywhere between 40 to 50, 55 students in a class in high school, probably less than that in elementary. But you can actually contract with families, have about 20, 22 students, and probably make a lot more money than you are right now as a public school teacher. That was a conversation I had with that individual who represents the teachers union. Mm-hmm.
Steve Haugard, I'm a first-term representative in South Dakota, and my wife and I have homeschooled our 8 kids. But I was at a forum, and I don't remember the comment that I made, but it drew the union president, the teachers union president, to come and talk to me afterwards to try to clarify that. Anyway, I eventually found myself and her on common ground as far as my perspective in our particular areas, that our school system there is inundated with social problems because we have this huge influx of immigrants through Lutheran social services in large measure. Anyway, they have all these social issues that are in the schools, and my point to the union representative was that we need to move some money from our social services budget into the school system, maybe to pick up the slack here, because what I heard at various meetings around the city before that point in time was that the teachers were frustrated with their need to address the social issues. It wasn't as though they didn't want to, but it was taking away from their ability to engage with the academics. And that's what I pointed out to her, is that you folks should be teaching, and it'd be to your benefit not to have all these social issues. So I think that'd be a selling point in this conversation, that you would be able to see those kids move to a place where they can maybe be better served and not draw down on the teachers that are in the public school system. So I think it's potentially a point of coming together with the teachers unions.
Steve, if I could, I don't want to monopolize the time here, but we didn't just do ESAs in the state of Nevada this last session. We addressed a lot of issues. We had a Read by 3 program. We developed this program called Zoom Schools, dealing with ELL problems that we have in both Washoe County, which is Reno, and Clark County and Las Vegas. We also instituted a new program called Victory Schools. And Victory Schools are not just urban, but also some of the rural schools, some of the schools that are on Indian reservations as well. And what we're looking for were schools that needed some sort of wraparound services as well. One of the things as conservatives, of course, we also wanted to make sure that not only were we creating a system where they had wraparound services, but that we also had some sort of accountability that goes along with it, measurable levels that we can say, yes, this is working, or no, it's not working. But the Victory Schools were a way to say, public schools, we understand you have problems, you have social issues, you have kids that aren't getting taken care of. We're going to allow those community schools to better address the needs of those kids in those areas, but with accountability measures.
I think we have time for one quick question if there is one, otherwise, okay. Then we'll be breaking for about 15 minutes, and then lunch will be in the other room. So.
Larry Scott, New Mexico. 2 quick questions. The first, provisions for accountability, and the second, the impacts of ESAs on infrastructure funding.
I'm not sure if I understand the infrastructure question. What?
Yeah, buildings, football stadiums, schoolyards, all of the fixed assets that are a very large part of public school funding.
I personally, unless you want to take this, Jamie, do you want?
Well, I mean, I can take the second one. The first one, the accountability is important, and I think more important. But there is a cost shift in these proposals, and that is actually, if you're interested in money, one of the selling points. If you've got overcrowded schools, or we in our state separate our capital financing from our operations financing. So one of the significant cost savings is you'll never have to build buildings. You'll now make the private sector figure out how to do that within the 90% of the operating money. And so there is a bit of a cost shift on there, but there are entrepreneurs who feel like, I can make a go of it. This is enough money for me to be able to pull it off, and they will find the efficiencies. Whether there's enough or not, I don't know. And maybe when you start to get into the secondary conversation about how do you handle transportation, how do you handle facilities, what do you do with the local resources, which are passed by our voters, at least in our state and in many, to provide buildings and facilities. How do you get a share of that as another provider of education services? But for now, it's a cost shift.
And I'll add, and I think I understand now better the question. You know, for a while, you know, with charter schools, we've only been given what the allotment is per student, right? So we've been operating with those kinds of costs. We don't get anything for buildings, for capital costs or anything like that. About 2013, I passed a bill in the Nevada legislature allowing, and here's where we're talking about, you know, finding solutions to the you know, building problems that we're having in charter schools. I had to pass a bill that would allow charter schools to access the bond market. And so again, it's you know, privatization, so to speak, of that, and having avenues so that we can create. And if you look at some of the newer charter schools in Nevada, most of them kind of look like a school that you would normally associate with a public school. We're building a gym next year as part of one of the big you know, K-12 schools that we have. But as far as accountability, some of the things that we put in the bill itself, we only disperse the money every quarter. It's quarterly. We also allow the account to be frozen if discrepancies are found. The account is frozen over the course of the summer unless you come and say that would like to do a summer program of some sort. So we're trying to freeze that. There is the accountability as far as are the students receiving the education that they're supposed to. One of the things that we put in there is that every year you must be tested. You must, and we allow for that in the bill, that you're allowed to use a portion of the bill to take a test. And what the test that we asked was for a norm reference test. It doesn't have to be this test or that test. It just has to be a norm reference test. The Iowa Basic Skills of, what is it? Did I hit it that right? Iowa, it's been a long time since I took that test. Yeah, so I mean, it could be a lot of different types of tests as long as it's norm reference test to kind of give us an idea that the student that just went through a year of learning is where they're supposed to be at. I didn't want to tie it to anything, you know, more than that. I didn't ask for a criterion reference test. There are some schools out there, some private schools or some delivery systems that will not be tied to the Common Core. And so therefore they don't necessarily have to all of a sudden take one of the two, you know, Smarter Balanced or the PARCC test.
Okay, so I thank you everyone for being here, and thank you to all the panelists.